Welcome to the Dealing with Goliath podcast. The mission of Dealing with Goliath is to sharpen the psychological edge of negotiation and high impact conversations for business leaders with skin in the game who want to be more effective under pressure, uncover hidden value, and increase profitability. With expert guests across the business spectrum, we deliver gems of wisdom delving into their methods, their thinking and approach to business life and to problem solving. Now, this is a Grande Cup of Insight, longer form podcast interview. We take a bit more time to delve into our guests' experiences, stories, get those priceless points of view and nuggets for you. I'm your host, Al McBride. My guest today is Rob Begg. Now, Rob helps high-achieving entrepreneurs align mind, body, and spirit to attain next-level performance with ease, certainty, and speed. Now, it's a little bit unusual today because Rob has been with us before, and with great demand, he was requested that he have a follow-up interview, which is fantastic. There was a lot of positive feedback from the last one. For anyone who's interested, that's episode 53, How Spirituality Can Unlock Next Level Performance. Now, today we're going to expand further on some of those concepts. Don't worry, you don't have to have listened to that, but it may inform some of the stuff that we're talking about today. So, Rob, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Delighted to be asked back.
Yeah, it was fascinating for me, and obviously for quite a few of the audience, quite a few of the listeners were requesting, I need more on this, they said. We want more. Give us more of these ideas, because it was truly fascinating stuff, Rob.
Yes.
And we were talking about this. We were talking about a whole load of different things, but one of the things that came up was this idea of wanting an experience you're not already familiar with, and some of the difficulties people run into. Because I should just say, if you're not familiar with Rob just doesn't just sort of get in that executive coaching, get some results. Rarely an increment, sometimes it's probably incremental, but a lot of the testimonials and from people I've talked to talk in like record-breaking months by 5x, 10x, and yet a lot of them are working significantly less. So it really is that stuff of doubling or more the income and working half the time, if that's what the goal was.
Yeah.
So you're getting hugely significant results for people. So as I said, just bear that in mind when Rob is talking. If some of the ideas are a little bit out there for your immediate experience, this man gets serious results. So let's talk about that. So a lot of your clients come to you and are sort of saying, right, I've heard from various people, Rob, that you're fantastic. I want this. I want this sort of huge increase in the goal, and maybe more control over my time, and maybe enjoying the experience more. So where do you meet them? What do you bring them into then? Talk us through that, through that idea of their experience. Yeah.
Big question. And I may have to come back to you to remind me of the question. But the first thing I would say is I don't get my clients any results. I support them to get results for themselves. So my ego might want to own that I, as a coach, get my clients results. But any coach that claims to get their clients results is really a bit misguided.
I agree. At best, we're a catalyst. So yeah.
Yes, exactly that. So, however, my clients do experience, not all of them, admittedly. It's predicated on a willingness to explore the unknown, predicated on a desire for what they want and a willingness to explore the unknown. So, most of my clients are seeking a tangibly different experience and outcome. So call that, they've got income of X and they're working X number of hours. They want an income of Y and to work Y number of hours, have more freedom, whatever. But typically what they're really seeking is something quantumly different. So that is not known to them in their experience. And the aspect of themselves that is seeking that, although we could get into this, Al, there are two primary motivations. What I would call a negative vision, which most people have, because they're coming at seeking an experience of life or seeking an outcome based on a belief that they're not going to be safe, secure, worthy, or loved or approved of enough until they're at that place. That's what I would call a negative vision. Or they're seeking that experience for the love of it, and it may be the same experience, but the underlying motivation is different, and one is getting in our way and one is supporting us to go faster. So we could maybe get into unpicking that.
Absolutely.
But regardless, they're seeking a different experience, an unknown experience. Because if it was known to them, if it was already in their experience, they wouldn't be seeking it.
Right.
And the larger part of them, the spiritual side of them, is seeking that unknown experience, that expression of consciousness. And yet the mind, when we get entangled in the mind and the stories of the mind, what the mind is for preserving the status quo. So what most people do is they try and create the new experience by thinking their way to it. And in thinking their way to it, they're using the conditioning of the mind and their past in order to try and create their future, which is akin to driving a car, trying to drive a car using the rearview mirror. It's possible, but it makes for a bit of a messy experience. And people take 20, 30, 40 years to arrive at an outcome, call that a lifetime, a career, right, that it might otherwise get to in a couple of years or 5 years.
And that's presuming that they're finding the actual destination they probably want, rather than finding they're at somewhere where they don't particularly want.
Well, there's that, yeah. And one of the reasons people don't end up at a particular destination point is they hit an obstacle, and because they've set a fear-based, because they've got a negative vision, it's a fear-based orientation. Like, if I don't get to here by then I won't be good enough, or I won't have the life that I want. Then they hit a block in the road and they change their mind. So it's a bit like, let's say we were driving from London and we wanted to go to Inverness, and all of a sudden there's a diversion on the M6, and we say, actually, I didn't want to go to Inverness that much anyway. Why don't we just go to Blackpool? And then we're on the way to Blackpool and we hit another obstacle, and so actually Blackpool, no, let's maybe change and we'll go to Manchester. And most people spend their lives changing their minds and then wondering why their lives don't change very much. And the reason they change their minds is either because they've set a goal for what their current belief system believes in, which means they're going to keep perpetuating more of the same, or they've set a goal based on something they don't really desire. It's just something they feel they should want. So
does that mean that resilience becomes a lot easier when you have that clarity of where you're heading to?
Yes, and when you understand that resilience is who we really are, it's not something we need to get from the outside. It's intrinsic to our nature.
Okay, let's dive into that one now a little bit too.
So, if you listen to a lot of the teachings out there, whether it's spiritual teachings, whether it's Eckhart Tolle or any number of other spiritual teachers, they talk about the presence of awareness and now. And now is when we come into the present moment, like when we're truly present, which is rare for most people. Most people can't sit still in the present moment for any length of time. They find it too unfamiliar, too disturbing, and yet everything we really seek is found in the present moment. That's where life happens. The illusion that's created by the mind is that we can be somewhere in the future, and yet none of us has ever experienced the future or experienced the past. We only ever experience now. Future and the past are illusions, constructs of the mind. And the irony is that when we come back to the present moment, we eliminate all the disturbances that are created by our mind, flitting us or putting us into the future or drawing on memories of the past. And what we find is all the resilience, all the confidence, all the wisdom, all the intelligence, everything that we need in order to create the life of our dreams is accessible in the present moment. Because we're tapping into our true nature. We're getting the mind out of the way. The mind is really the intellect is the gatekeeper or the bouncer to our heart's desires. It's the thing that gets in the way.
So how do you make it work for you rather than against you? Because I was re-listening to the interview the last time, and you said something very interesting, which was the ego is not the enemy. It is
No, it's
the opposite of the Ryan Holiday book. The ego is the enemy because of the trouble that the ego gets you into. But
yes.
or when you have very ego-based goals, is what a lot of that was about. But so, how is the ego not the enemy? Because as we were saying, the ego is there to protect us. It's about survival. It's about it serves a particular function in its own way. It's helpful, but so this is where you come in on the but.
Yes, and we could go down a big rabbit hole here. So the ego is not the enemy because the ego is actually just a belief. That's all it is. It's a belief that we are just a mind and body. But actually, when you get into when you really dive into this material, and for most of my clients, we don't need to go that far. But
Right.
The mind and body are just a veil for our true nature to have objective experience. In and of itself, it's just a belief. But it's the identification with our mind that's the problem for most people. It's that we believe our thoughts and feelings are real. So when I and the mind is so fast in preserving the status quo or in quashing our heart's desires, and all of our heart's desires, our true desires, they come from our true nature, seeking experience through this individualized aspect of consciousness. So we're all individuals here for experience. And yet the mind, and when we identify with our mind, we crush our dreams and quash them and bury them without even realizing it. So if I said to most people, what do you want? I had a conversation last week with someone, what do you want? The first thing out of their mouth was, well, what I don't want is to continue working this hard. What I don't want is this. What I don't want is that. Really clear on what they didn't want.
Right.
So what do you want? So, well, I don't really know. And I don't think it's possible currently anyway. And then I said, well, what about earning double and working half? Well, I'd love that, but, and the but is the mind.
Yeah.
And the mind comes in with the reasons why we can't earn double and work half. And the mind comes in with conditioned response based on our belief system. And then we believe the mind. And of course, when we believe the mind, we get to experience the mind stories, because that's what the mind is. It's a projector for its own contents. So what really to create the change we want, so many teachings are done. And I went through this. I taught it. I tried to study it. I tried to change my beliefs on the way. And it's a slow and torturous journey, and most people don't succeed in changing their mindset. I think I said in something last week, when we try and create change, when we try and use the mind to change the mind, it's like sending a police officer in to catch a thief when the thief is the police officer.
Yeah.
So we go around in circles. We've got to get behind the mind, and that's into the nature of our true essence, our spiritual essence. And that's of course where a lot of people say, oh, I don't buy that spirituality stuff. But it's ignorance in the true sense of the word is why they don't buy it, because the mind doesn't want to know. But the ignorance of our true nature is the cause of all suffering.
Absolutely, because you're not having what you want.
You're not having,
or you're not being what you want. Or
yeah, yeah, exactly. And you're striving to get somewhere in the future when that's just an illusion.
But what's fascinating about this is that it actually parallels closer than I had previously thought, with a lot of even just the top level stuff of cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral coaching, which I guest lecture in, so I'm that bit more familiar with it. That we talk about the ABCs. You have the activating event or the trigger, and most people think this happened, therefore I feel like this. Whereas even with CBT, one of the first things you learn is this happened, it's triggered a belief. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's hidden.
Yes.
And that's why you have this consequential feeling or behavior. And looking at that belief is how you actually change it. So you're going kind of deeper again, but it's just to
Yes.
point out to everyone that this is sort of fundamental stuff through a lot of therapy, a lot of belief systems.
Oh yes,
Which is very nice.
it's eminently. I'm a great believer in ultimately what everyone's seeking out, regardless of regardless of our beliefs and our views of the world or our perspectives or what we do. What everybody's seeking is happiness and fulfillment and joy. Scratch the surface on anybody's goals.
But this is what I do. How do people know what they want? It's like, well, they all want the same. They want to be happy, to do interesting work, to have more control over their time. What was the other one? Have enough money that's not a stress, essentially.
Yes, well, I said to someone the other day, happiness, and I've had it said to me twice in the last year, Rob, what if all I get from working with you is that I'm blissfully happy and fulfilled all of the time? What about the money? I said, well, £1 million a year or blissfully happy, fulfilled. If you had to make a choice and the money didn't guarantee the other, you could have the money, but you might be miserable. Which would you choose? And of course, blissfully happy and fulfilled. Because if you're that, the money doesn't matter. But the reality is you can have both. But when we go chasing our happiness in material objects, when we believe that the new car in the driveway or the new house is going to fulfill us, it's really not. What happens is it fulfills us in the moment of its realization, but the fulfillment comes from the collapsing of our obsession with time. Right. It collapses us back into the now moment. Like when you pick up the keys for the new Maserati or the new house, in that moment, the fulfillment of the desire, you come back to the present moment. And it's that's creating the experience of joy and fulfillment and happiness.
Right.
And of course, then you get your car scratched in the supermarket car park, and all of a sudden your happiness is gone. Someone scratched your happiness.
Well, even worse, if nothing happens, it's called hedonic adaptation.
Yeah.
The happiness level of that new Maserati wears off surprisingly quickly, like 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and people are back to normal. It's the same with lottery winners.
Yes.
Lottery winners and people who are put in wheelchairs after car crashes, after a year, their happiness levels even out.
Yes.
Think about that. You win 40 million in the lottery versus someone else who's lost the power of their legs. So one's very unhappy and the other's very happy for a while. And then guess what? They both even out after a year to 18 months.
Because the thing was never the source of the happiness anyway. And on a separate note, I read a statistic the other day, and I don't recall the exact stats, but I think 75% of all lottery winners end up bankrupt within 5 years or end up losing it all within 5 years.
Yes, and I've heard that as well. It came to me a few weeks ago, and I was thinking, what would Rob say about that? And I think I know the answer. It's because it's not in their identity, in who they think they are.
Exactly. They're in the spirit of maybe having been poor, for want of a better word, and then all of a sudden they win the lottery. They got £40 million, and they go out and spend it, and they enjoy the spending, and they enjoy the shift in lifestyle and all the rest of it. But their underlying state of identity, their self-concept, the aspect of their infinite nature that they're identified with hasn't changed. So our unconscious, if you like, will always move us to continue experiencing what it survived in the past. It's always looking to find harmony with our predominant sense of identity. So that's why it's so challenging to be in a situation, and I've been there myself, where you're really wanting more in life because you feel you're not enough or you've not got enough, and you go out there and you strive for it, and you wonder why progress is so slow. And progress can't be any faster than the internal shift. It just can't be. So the key to getting 5 or 10x income is to shift your identity first, shift your perception of self first, and then your reality or your outside world starts to catch up with your identity. But it's just a mirror.
I can attest to this as well. In the last few weeks, as I emailed you there a few weeks back, uh, I think I've got more done in the same or less time than ever because I realized a vision of where I want to go. But the clarity, well, it's more so who I wanted to be, which version of Al do I want to be, and then I realized I to a certain extent I'm already that,
Yes, you are.
and so it just sort of shifted naturally, and a huge amount of things are so much easier. Any form of procrastination is just gone.
Yes.
What was amazing was the level of self trust. So I could go, I'm
Yes.
going to read this thing because it's relevant to that. But it's not out of procrastination. I'm like, then I'm going to do this and I do that. And then I'm going to do the other. And things are just get done,
Yes, exactly.
which is amazing. Now, I'm also not there. Like, I know I'm not there yet either. But that's the fun is kind of growing into that. But it's a growth pattern. But I was trying to think, well, am I that or am I not that? And the
Well,
way I described
you
it
are
was,
that.
if you're on the road to Dublin and you're in County Dublin, but you're not in Dublin City yet, I'm still in Dublin, if you get my drift. So, but that's exciting. That's like, oh, that's great. So there's nice
Yes.
surprises on the way of how is this going to turn out? Where are the little swerves in the road?
Exactly. And without being overtly obsessed about how, you just stay true to the vision. And that, that's any visionary, any great leader, in whether in business or any high achiever, sports, business, in battle, they've all been led by a heart-based vision of the future. And that, it being in the spirit of winning, being in the spirit of being in Dublin when you're in Belfast, or being in the spirit that will move us to do whatever is required of us in order to end up there physically. Because the order of play is spiritual, intellectual, physical. It's never the other way around.
Exactly. So I think you said the other day, what was it? Be, do, have.
Yes.
Not do, have, be.
Yes.
Which is what most people are, that's continually how most people are struggling and striving.
Yes. Whereas if you say to them, are you a human being or a human doing? There's a clue in the name.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is one of the traps that people keep falling into.
Yes. Well, we're conditioned to from such an early age. If you want to get ahead in the world, you've got to work really hard. Money doesn't grow on trees. You've got to go out and work for it. All the messages that we get when we come into this world, then because that becomes impregnated in our mind, and the mind then goes gathering the evidence for its own contents.
Yeah, it's confirmation bias. It's like,
absolutely,
this is what I believe, so I filter stuff to confirm it. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
Exactly. It's a very interesting one. How do you start people off on moving out of that into so people are going, right, great, I'm open to this idea, right? Because all of the struggle and all of that, and they can get there. But it takes, as you said, a lot more work, a lot more graft and struggle and all the rest of it. So how do you start with your clients in sort of flipping that around to work out the B part?
So it's my belief that we can only really get this through experiencing it. The intellect wants to, or the ego wants to hang on to an intellectual construct of learning. So, what most people have, I think, as I said earlier, most people have a desire to change something in their experience. The three big buckets: health, wealth, relationships.
Right.
And often when that desire becomes strong enough, or when there's enough suffering with not being able to create the outcome, we turn to various resources. And for most people, it's books or YouTube videos or something. And when we read that book on wealth creation or spirituality or mindset or growth mindset or whatever, when we read that book, the intellect is there, and the intellect's, oh, this is it. This is what I needed. This is giving me the answers. And we get comfort that we found the solution. But really what's going on is the intellect, the ego, which is all for preserving the status quo, is the one that's doing the comforting, saying, kidding ourselves on. And then, of course, we put the book down and we finish the book, and 6 months later, it's like, oh, I think I've got something still missing. I need another book. And we can spend 20 years in the books. And every time we read the book, we think we've got the next nugget and the next answer, and we're closer to, but we never are. So it's the experience of our true nature that is where I start. And so that's done through number of exercises. But the one hour, and I can't remember whether we did it last time, was, if we stand in front of the mirror and, we stand in front of the mirror today, everybody would agree that they look fundamentally different to the way they looked when they were a small child.
Sure.
And our physical environment, our lives have changed beyond all measure. Our lives are always in a state of flux, if you like. And yet, when we stand in front of that mirror and we look into our eyes, is there an awareness there that has been with us throughout our entire life experience? Is there something constant about Al McBride?
Sure.
That's never left Al McBride, despite Al McBride's body and bank balance and world changing? There's something constant about you, your I amness, your consciousness. And that consciousness that's looking out from behind our eyes is the constant. That's the truth about who we are. And who we really are is a point of perception for consciousness. And so that's the starting point, giving people an experiential understanding of their true nature, and then helping them to understand that we have an emotional guidance system to support us to realize whether we're tuned into a point of perception that's in harmony with our heart's desires, or a point of perception that isn't. And anytime we're tuned into something that's more limiting or constricting, we feel the constriction and the contraction of that. Like if I buy into, there's a recession coming, I'm going to be affected, I need to think about making staff redundant, we feel the contraction of that, because we're choosing a point of perception that we're going to end up experiencing, but which isn't what we're here to experience or what we desire to experience. And it's just as easy to say, there's a recession going on, but I'm tuned into my vision and I'm going to experience growth and fulfillment and expansion regardless. And if we would tune our awareness...
That's a really interesting point, because some people would say you risk burying your head in the sand and whatnot. Whereas, just to clarify, you're saying a recession may be on the way, and everybody's saying, there's a recession on the way. And it's not that you're burying your head in the sand, you're saying, so how we... you're stating that your vision is abundance and growth and things are going to happen, even though there's a recession. So you're primed to talk about it at a different level. You're priming yourself to see the opportunities of how you expand and move to get that growth, rather than fall victim to the recession like a lot of your competition.
So it's not a denial.
Exactly.
It's absolutely not a denial, but it's back to understanding that we're always in a position of choice. It's just the mind is so fast in denying our awareness of that choice, masking our awareness of that choice. So if there's a recession going on, obviously we don't desire to shrink our business and contract and suffer the impact of recession. So what do we desire? Well, we desire to be flourishing and growing and expanding and serving more people and all that stuff. So when we come back to our heart's desires, when we come back to the present moment, to our true nature, we say, well, that's what I desire. Then we're furnished with thinking, because, of course, one of the things we believe in is that we're in charge of our own thinking, which is nonsense. So we're then furnished with thinking, and we're furnished to move in ways that create the outcome to which we are attached, good, bad, or indifferent.
So just to clarify on that one, because again, it's one of these things where cognitive behavioral therapy is based on, on ancient Greek thinking, and the flip side of that is, mindfulness is based on Buddhist thinking, and both of them are in a huge amount of overlap on that.
Yes.
That our thoughts are not us. They're clouds that float in front of you. They float
Yes.
by.
Yes.
And equally, our emotions are not us. They're things that we do. So it's the same idea that to realize that there's a gap, that our
Yes.
emotions, our thoughts aren't really us. They're here and they're passing by.
Yes, there are thoughts, and there's the Buddhist philosophy and there's the Hindu philosophy, and they're both at ends of a spectrum, but they're actually talking about the same thing, really. But our thoughts and feelings are is in essence manifestations in consciousness, but we don't choose our thoughts. Like if I said to
Exactly, they just appear and they float by. Yeah.
Yes, but the quality and nature of our thoughts, in terms of the ones we get attached to, is dictated or determined by our underlying state of consciousness. So guess what? If I turn on the news and there's all sorts of doom and gloom about the economy,
right,
and I start to get emotionally involved in that, or my mind goes, "Oh, what does that mean for you, Rob Begg? That means people are not going to buy stuff. People are going to have less budget." No, I could get onto that train of thought, and guess what happens then is, and I'm triggered to do that by something in my consciousness. But I get onto that train of thought, and guess what? Before I know it, I'm off down a line of thinking and I'm experiencing the corresponding emotions. And the next day I'm going into the office and I'm saying, guys, I'm sorry, we're going to have to make some people redundant. And I go into shrinkage recession mode. And then I'm out there telling all my friends about how terrible it is and I've had to make people redundant. And I play my part in perpetuating the recession.
Yeah.
I'm an active participant in perpetuating the recession.
A lot of you're talking about is self-fulfilling prophecies, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what recessions are triggered by belief.
Absolutely. And just to again ground this in sort of the outcome or the reality of this, I think there were only two key airlines in the world when the last Great Recession happened that didn't shrink. Ryanair and Virgin went to Boeing and Airbus and said, hey, you're going to do us an amazing deal because you've just had billions of dollars worth of orders cancelled.
Yes.
So they saw what everyone else saw as disaster, they saw as an opportunity. It's the same with people in the stock market who, the stocks are crashing. And as somebody gave the analogy, it's like going to a Ferrari showroom and everything is 60 or 70% off and you're getting afraid.
Yes, exactly.
Right. It's like some people see it as, the world's crashing. And other people go, great, bargain time.
Yes.
Right. And that's a perspective which comes from, as you said, your emotional and identity.
Yes. And then you get to experience the reality that's in harmony with your emotionalized perspective. Because that's what the mind does. The mind will always show you the evidence of the contents that you're emotionally attached to. But one of the primary illusions of the mind is that this outside world is separate. Yeah. And yet, if we really do some self-inquiry, if we're prepared to, and many people are, and it takes some courage, we can see that actually our results in life are absolutely a mirror of our own internal machinations and beliefs and so on.
Well, one of the great coaching questions, and again, the coach was asking is probably talking about at a slightly different level that you were, but it's that's why it's a great question. He used to ask, how have you, often unwittingly, contributed to the situation that you say you don't want?
Yes.
And it gets people to really think, oh, well, actually, maybe I did X, maybe I was doing Y, which led to the contribution to this problem. One of the things that's why that question is so great is it creates an awareness of agency where we think that we probably don't have agency.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the essence of, I know it's the essence of the work you do, it's the essence of the work I do, is because the alternative is that we're victims.
Exactly.
And who wants to go through life perceiving themselves to be a victim? We may as well just, lie down and give up. We're not here to be victims, but the alternative of choosing, the alternative is to perceive that we're a victim.
Absolutely, and the famous one is Nelson Mandela, wasn't it? He was asked when he got it, how did you survive 24 years in prison, Mr. Mandela? He said, survive? I didn't survive. I was preparing.
Yes.
And that was his whole vision. I'm bringing this country from here to there.
Yes.
What do I need to do to make that easier, to make that better, to make that happen?
Yes.
And he was preparing all that time, which is a fascinating perspective. Again, you see the manifestation of
exactly. Yes, exactly.
An identity and a belief. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the challenge is that the price of awareness is responsibility.
Yeah.
That's the trade-off. And of course, human nature to a degree being what it is, it would be nice to get everything we want without having to take any responsibility.
Right.
But the price of the awareness is, well, actually, I am creating my own reality here. I am responsible for the outcomes in my experience.
I heard Chris Voss, who wrote Never Split the Difference, which is a very popular book on negotiation, and it's great, full of stories. It's very enjoyable, and he's a former FBI hostage negotiator who then did stuff with Harvard and businesses and all the rest of it. And I quite like a lot of his stuff. But one of the things he said in a podcast interview, which really surprised me, because he's kind of a no mess and kind of old school cop, this kind of guy, and he said, fundamentally, he said, what are the traits of the best negotiators? The ones that get like a magnitude better than the average. And he said, you have to fundamentally believe that the universe has got your back.
Yes.
I thought, wow, for such a no messing kind of guy, it was quite a spiritual thing to say. That
yes.
But and I remember, I think I wrote a post about this, that what does that do when you turn up at the negotiation room where, this problem is unsolvable, we're never going to work this out, we hate these guys, or whatever, the two sides are up against each other. And he has a fundamental belief that there's a solution, and we'll find it,
Yes.
That's a hell of a way to approach very challenging situations.
Yes, and yet it's the way to, it's just the perfect way to approach life in general is, to surrender to life, that because life is trying to happen through us.
Yes,
and yet we have the ability. I used the analogy on a call this morning. If you imagine a seedling sprouting in the soil, in a fertile soil, it's part of nature. That's we are as we are, and it's heading towards the sun, and it's seeking expansion and flourishing, and it will grow branches and all the rest of it. And then you drop a great big paving slab on it. It will still seek to go sideways and might crop up between the cracks of the paving slab and so on. But we as humans, unlike any other creature on the planet, as God's highest form of creation, if you want to call us that, we have the ability to drop a paving slab on ourselves.
Yeah.
To get in our own way.
It's the classic thing, help people get out of their own way, but that's really truly what I think we're all doing here.
And that's perfect, because we can't get out of our own way if we don't know who we are. If we identify as a mind and body, we're going to keep getting in our own way. If we deny our true essence, we're going to keep getting in our own way. There's no two ways about it. Even if that means denying that we're stuck, because the ego won't let us accept that.
So how do people start tapping into that? I know I've asked this before, and you start with that exercise, but how do you kind of get, because as you said, the ego is tricky. I mean, I've had this where myself and a friend call it ego-induced amnesia, where I kind of go, right, great. And I even start doing something that actually does feel right. Like, this is fundamentally good. And then it's like, look over here, distraction,
Yes.
How do we know that we're on the right path? That's the great question. You mentioned some of do we listen to the body? Is it manifesting in the body that if this,
your body is like it's a very good guide. So creating the changes our heart desires is about allowing ourselves to line up with them, to surrender to them. We're conditioned to need permission slips to feel good. So we look to the outside world. Well, when this happens, when this happens, then I'll feel good. So we're looking all the time for permission slips to feel good. Whereas if I said, what would you like to earn next year, Al? And you said X thousand pounds, and I would say, how would that feel? You'd say, oh, it'd feel great. And I said, well, all you really need to do is to allow yourself to feel the great now. Just feel that now, embody that now as if you already have it. You say, well, that's delusional. But that's the mind telling you it's delusional. So when we do that, when we start to embody our desires, it's a commitment to our heart's desires, is to embody it. What happens is we are then faced with some of the, not necessarily literally faced, but we get to experience the releasing of some of the conditioning that's held our old experience in place. So, but the fastest way to our desires is through embodiment, not through mindset work or intellectual endeavor. But doing that from an understanding. Yeah. Sorry?
How do we start doing that? Is it as simple as just thinking, using our imagination, as you said, in that much more creative, valuable way?
Well, yes, but doing it from an understanding of who we really are and how reality actually works is the most supportive. Really getting clarity on when we say I, we say I more than any other word in our lifetimes. And yet, do we really know who the I is before it's I am wealthy, I am rich, I'm fat, I'm thin, I'm poor? Who is the I, and do we understand the implications of what we're attaching to our I-ness? So we can go at it, we can come in at it at any level and succeed to different degrees. But if we really want to allow ourselves to live life in harmony, then it's really just about being present. Because when we're present, like truly present, living in now, we become the observer of ourselves and we feel completely fulfilled, because that's our true nature. The reason everybody's seeking happiness and fulfillment and joy is it's because it's who we really are. So when we surrender to that, to the present moment, then everything that we've been working for, striving for, etc., that's heart-based, we get to experience without all the effort and the striving. It's just that our mind, our identification with our mind gets in the way of that. So it's not about mindset, it's really about dissolving the mind. People say, well, you can't operate without the mind, you've got to be able to think. Yes, you do need to be able to think, but you become infinitely more intelligent when you get the mind out of the way and you stay present. The quality of your thinking is drastically improved. McKinsey's did a 10-year study on flow, and whilst they never really got to the source or the origin of flow, 500% productivity increase.
Yeah. I just repeat that for everyone. 5x. That means you can come in on Monday.
Yeah, take the rest of the week
do
off.
your day's work, and you're equal to everybody else working Monday to Friday. That's essentially 5x.
Yes.
And we mentioned before Steve Kotler's Flow Genome Project, where they're researching a lot of that. But again, You're talking at the level behind that.
Yes, at the source.
So how you get those states.
Yes, we can go looking for the physical reasons for flow, but actually we're looking in the wrong place. And that's the mind wants us to keep looking in the wrong place to perpetuate the illusion. I don't know if I talked about that on the previous podcast, but the ego identity is so strong that when we start to pierce the illusion, we get met with all sorts of logical and rational and reasonable explanations for why we need to be looking elsewhere. The illusion does not want to be broken, because the fear is death. That's the fear that most people are unconsciously facing when it comes to creating the change they really want in their life. They just don't know that. So that's why the ego has such a hold on people. That's why, oh, I really, really, really want to express myself in a different way. I want to lose weight. I want to earn X. I want to serve more people, etc., etc. But the cost is sacrificing our current state of being, our old way of being. And unless we know who we are, it's going to be a challenge. We might get incremental over time, but incremental is not what we really want.
No. And as you said, it's in that line of, when we say the ego, we're talking about the survival brain, survival mode, which no matter how bad things are, well, almost, we want the familiar. That's what the ego wants because it's safe.
Yes.
And as you said, that's why incremental progress is about all you get, because it's just one tiny little bit more. So it can just about handle that.
Yes.
Whereas to make these huge leaps,
Yes.
you need a totally different approach.
Yes, and one of the scariest things can be when you start to when your new reality, if you want to call it that, when your new desires when you start to create a quantum change in your life. You know, whatever that is. Let's say you've been working 80 hours a week or 70 hours a week, and all of a sudden you're now working 10 hours a week and getting the same outcome. Like your old reality is dissolving, and for the ego, it's like, this is not right. This is not right. I need to be working, or I need to, it's that's what goes on for people. So that's where being anchored to our true self is so important.
It's interesting that you take the approach. I mean, I remember there was a very popular hypnotherapist who helps people have the old state that's no longer desired seem less and less familiar, but more importantly, the new state, a way of being, feel already familiar. So there's a parallel there of so that you can glide into it rather than thinking it's highly alien and scary.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. And that's really the game we're playing. That's the game of life. Is decide what our heart desires, not from a negative construct, not from a identification with mind and body. See the challenge. Are we okay for time?
Yeah, go for it.
The challenge when we're born into this world, we identify as mind and body, and we're conditioned to identify as mind and body. We believe that that's what we are, and because of that, we're missing a connection with our true self, with our true essence. So because of that identification, we can't help but be running an unconscious and to some degree conscious belief that we're not viable or not worthy enough. So we go out into the world seeking to validate ourselves, whether that's to keep up with the Joneses, have the house, the car, the job, the career, meet approval, but it's validation based. And it's essentially it's driven by a lack of awareness of who we are. And then if we pursue that course of action, we get to a point of realizing we might achieve a great deal, but we get to a point of realizing actually there's never enough of more.
Exactly. Yeah, you never fill that void, as you say. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just temporarily satisfied at times by the next goal.
Exactly. It's just thinking there about the presence. I was on the west coast of Ireland visiting a friend there over the weekend, and seeing the amount of people. It's one of the great surfing beaches in Sligo in the northwest of Ireland, and just I read this about surfing, that surfing, for example, has, for PTSD sufferers, I think it was 4 weeks of surfing was the equivalent of a 12-week meditation course for stress reduction and all the bad symptoms. And a large amount of it is because people report just being, you have to be fully present, and
Yes.
you're fully present in this wider nature,
Yes.
which is a certain level of reset for the brain anyway. Like there's these studies about wandering through a forest is a great reset of people's blood pressure and everything else. And a large amount is because they get to turn the brain off, the chatter.
Yes.
And feel, as you say, getting more in touch with who they truly are, but even just being aware in the moment.
Yes, and your ability to stay on the surfboard is enhanced by the degree to which you switch your thinking off.
Yes.
Yes.
It's
Because we allow our true nature to take over.
That's an interesting question. Of your clients, do you find some of them that have activities that which turn off the brain actually get this stuff a lot faster?
Well, that's what I seek to support them with, is to do less thinking. Because the more active our brain is, and of course this is counterintuitive to what we're educated. So we could go down a rabbit hole and get into the fact that the brain is actually just an appearance in consciousness that appears relative to expectation and so on. But if you look at the research on psychedelics, for example, psilocybin or some of the other plant medicines, people report a vastly enhanced experience through psychedelic drugs.
Yeah.
So it feels like there's so much more going on that they've ever been aware of before, and so on. And yet, wire them up to a brain, whatever the term for the machinery is, brain monitoring equipment, and the activity in the brain is vastly diminished. And what's going on is there's a reduction in the disassociation from who we really are. So the more we switch the brain off, if you like, the more we come away from our chronic thinking patterns, which are all future and past based, which are illusions of the mind, and we come to the present moment, we diminish the amount of thinking and we tap into our true intelligence. And then we're moved to have intuitive inspiration. Many people say, "Oh, I've had my best thoughts in the shower. I've been wrestling with a problem for weeks, and then I went surfing, or I had a cold shower, and the answer just came to me." Well, where did that answer come from? Well, it came from your true nature, from your true intelligence. And if we'll only get out of our way, get out of the mind, we can experience more and more of that. And that's why we can have 500% productivity increases and move so much faster. But for the conditioned mind, it's a scary place to go. But it's only scary because we don't know. It's actually the best place we can go. What's scary is staying where we are with stuck in our current belief system.
Absolutely. It's something we mentioned briefly before. There's a fantastic series on Netflix for anyone who's interested called Changing Your Mind, which is from a book by Michael Pollan, where he goes into the research, which is from Johns Hopkins and Yale and a few other major institutions, on the therapeutic approach of a lot of these plant-based medicines, which were criminalized because of political reasons, which he goes into. It's quite fascinating. Even back in the 60s, they saw the crazy levels of therapeutic gain. Psilocybin, which is the substance in magic mushrooms, LSD, and even the more modern MDMA created. But all of them had the familiarity of turning off the default mode network, which is what we would refer to as our internal voice, as in the chatter. Now, it's very useful for focusing and planning and problem solving in one sense, but it's usually problematic because it's the inner critic for most of us in the other sense. And what most people were saying when they're interviewed after these experiences is, as I said, there was a self that just went away, or the volume was turned down, and they could actually hear the true voice, their true self. And they say it was as important as an experience as when their first child was born.
Yes.
That momentous. Because, as I said, they realize a certain inner truth.
Yes.
Which often then guides an awful lot of their thinking, decision-making, all the rest of it later on.
Yes.
Fantastic. It's fantastic stuff. Just to talk a bit more, looping back a minute, and into the body and manifestation in the body. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. Now, it's largely based around trauma and recovery from trauma from an American psychiatrist. And it was this idea that, the trauma, manifests itself in the body. And you were talking about looking to the body for clues as to true self or ego distraction destinations. Could you talk on that a little bit more?
Yes, and we're entering. The territory can become contentious and so on. So there's no denying that on our human adventure, we've all, almost without exception, we've all experienced traumatic events in our life. I think it's part of the human journey in one form or another, and some much more than others. So in no way would I want to be seen to be disregarding our life's journey and our experience and so on. However, when it comes to getting beyond that, to getting that trauma to no longer impact our future,
right?
It's my belief, my experience, my understanding that if we can, because of who we are, if we take a materialist paradigm, and we say, well, we've got trauma stored in the body, and therefore we need to get rid of that in order to be able to live a life that's free and all the rest of it. If because of who we are, if we adopt that belief that, oh yeah, you need some therapy, or you need to do X, Y, and Z, or go through a process in order to release that, then that will be our experience, because we get to experience what we are choosing to focus and believe in.
Right.
However, if we say, well, that trauma, whilst it's real and it's in our past, it's right now, it's a construct in our mind. And the mind is not in the body is in the mind. So it's a construct in our mind. It doesn't exist anywhere else other than in mind. Yes, you could say, well, it happened, it was real, but we can't now prove that. We can't prove anything happened yesterday. You could say, oh, there's yesterday's newspaper, but we're experiencing it now. We're only ever experiencing now. So with an understanding of who we are, we can say, well, what do you desire? What does your heart desire? And when we get connected to that from the present moment, then any healing that we believe we need to do is instantaneous, because there's really no healing to be done. That's a construct and a story of the mind. Consciousness is unaffected by anything that goes on in this experience. Consciousness, our true nature, is unaffected. Our body might be, I might carry a physical scar from an accident as a child, and that physical scar is a physical scar on my body. But what's causing the trauma is me relating to is the meaning I'm adding to that. But actually, as far as consciousness is concerned, I'm just an appearance, a temporary appearance in consciousness. At the end of my life, I will dissolve back into consciousness. Consciousness itself is unaffected, and consciousness itself is who we really are. So we can get absolutely entrenched in the belief that we've got trauma to heal and difficulties and all the rest of it that we must overcome. And that can absolutely be our experience if we believe it, because consciousness is just here for experience through the veil of this body, and we'll get to experience whatever we tune into. So it's not that any healing modalities are wrong. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if I believe that drinking a glass of water every day and leaning out my spare bedroom window with a coat hanger in my right hand pointing due west is what's going to support me to 10x my earnings, that will become my experience. I've got to believe it, and the likelihood of me believing that is pretty slim.
Right.
But we get to experience what we believe in. And if we would only understand that, then we might be more selective about what it is we're choosing to believe. Because if I believe that when I turn on the news that what the newsreader is telling me is going to affect my business, then it's going to. Because consciousness is here for experience, and what I get emotionally attached to, I'll get to see outpictured in my reality.
It's again, psychologist was talking about it at a slightly different level to what you are.
Yes.
But she essentially summed it up by saying, we don't tend to get what we deserve. We get what we deep down expect.
Yes. Yes, and of course, we're experiencing a lot of the time. We're experiencing what's been unconscious, because when we're growing up, we're suppressing a lot of some of our more traumatic experiences. We suppress them because they're uncomfortable. At the time, they're too uncomfortable for us to deal with. So we suppress, and it goes into our unconscious mind as conditioning, if you like.
Yeah.
And whilst the perception might be that it's in the body, it's in our mind. Our body is in the mind, and then we might experience something in our later life that is tied to that. So, for example, we might have an experience around relationships, and we might form a belief about relationships being difficult, or relationships never last, or marriages don't last, or whatever, and then
or wealth or relationships. The famous one is, I can have it but I can't hold it, as in I can have it briefly but it never lasts. Yeah, that's a classic one.
So you're right. We're playing out what we believe, and then of course when we have as we start to wake up to this realization, when we have experiences that are not in harmony with our desires, we go, okay, well, we can do some self-inquiry. Oh, what's alive in my consciousness that's causing me to keep experiencing this pattern? One of the things I used to work with CEOs with, recruit a sales director. Oh, the sales director is no good. And how many sales directors have you had in the last 10 years? Oh, I've had 8 of them, none of them any good. Oh, well, it's not the sales director. It's got nothing to do with the sales directors. So it's always about what's going on within us. It's never external. We can't ever find anything external. But that's a conversation for another day.
There's a lot to take in.
Yes,
a lot to take in there.
And I'm aware, sitting here, Al, that we talked about. I think the title of this podcast was about all performance being spiritual or something.
Exactly.
I'm conscious that we've not really dived into that, but I guess the essence of it is that what we experience in our physical world is at source coming from our spiritual essence, or from what we're allowing to be expressed through our mind.
Absolutely. So on that note, Rob, we'll pause for now.
Yes.
I look forward to our next conversation. So just for people who want to learn more about you, I have to say, Rob has a very fascinating newsletter, sometimes which is an email, sometimes is an audio clip. I recommend anyone who's interested in what Rob Begg is talking about here to go to robertbegg.com and sign up for that, and just start entering Rob's world there, and you'll get some very insightful, thought-provoking stuff, which, as I said a good while ago now, it started to trigger some changes for me, going back to what we talked about earlier, in that of not in any kind of if-then thinking, but just being and moving toward a certain identity, which I realized was already part of me. So it's been hugely helpful, and I know I'm only at the start of that journey, so it's quite exciting. So yeah, robertbegg.com, or you can probably find him again on LinkedIn at Robert Begg. That's Begg.
Double G. Yeah, I'm not even sure you can sign up for my email or newsletter at the moment, but
okay.
I need to check that. I think you probably can. Maybe by the time this podcast comes out, you can. But yeah. If it's,
absolutely. Well, look, thanks again, Rob. Great conversation.
Thank you.
Lots for people to think about.
Hopefully not too much.
Get in touch with Robert Begg. Yeah, if you feel stuck, either get in touch with me or Robert Begg.
Or even if you don't feel stuck, that's even better. You just want.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not. I generally don't work with. Well, everybody's stuck on some level, but generally I work with successful, fast growth entrepreneurs who just want to pick up the pace and do it with a bit more ease.
And enjoy the experience. Get greater fulfillment in that.
Enjoy the journey, yeah, because if we don't enjoy the journey, what's the point of the destination?
It's something that, as I said, I normally have a fairly good time, but the last couple of weeks in particular have just everything is more fun. It's just joyous,
Yes.
you know. And then you nearly feel guilty for everything.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. I shouldn't be having so much fun. That's
it's
not
like,
what life's
well,
about, is it?
yeah. And then you kind of realize it's the truth of that. Of course, why wouldn't it be fun?
Yes.
I mean, as I said, the guilt is nearly because an awful lot of other people aren't. I think,
Yes.
you know, why do I get to? It's literally the definition of privilege in a way of that. Why am I so lucky? You know.
Yes. Well, I think, part of the reason I now do what I do is it's everybody's birthright to have a joyous, harmonious journey. We're going to experience some ups and downs and some challenges, and we're in a world where we experience loss and we experience things that are unwanted and so on. But we don't have to have a miserable existence.
Absolutely not. And on a similar level, just to finish off, one of the great tragedies is people not fulfilling a potential that they wish to fulfill.
Yes, it's painful.
It is. It is. So, on that note, thanks, Rob.
Thanks,
Talk
Al.
to you soon.
Talk to you
Cheers.
soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.